All right, let's just jump right into this explainer, because what we're looking at today is honestly completely wild, but absolutely fascinating. We're going to unpack this highly structured, almost strictly mathematical approach to human connection. It literally equates our deepest interpersonal desires to a precise biological circuit, and a circuit that's actually fighting a turf war against blind institutional systems. It frames these very human experiences through the lens of neurobiology, algorithmic searches, and spatial cartography. It's an incredibly unique, sci-fi kind of perspective on how we connect, and how external bureaucracies can either spark that connection or just completely barricade it. So, to make sense of all this, here's our roadmap for today. First, the missing biological geography. 2, the institutional dyspraxia. 3, the architecture of flirting. And finally, achieving deterministic joy. Okay, part 1, the missing biological geography. To lay the groundwork here, this framework makes a massive leap, rooting a super-modern, hyper-analytical neurobiological concept squarely in ancient text. Specifically, it points to the book of Judges, chapter 8, verse 18, and this Hebrew word "ipho." And the translation reveals a flawless historical pun. You see, the question is usually read as, what kind of men were they? But literally translated, the word means where, or in what place. The source material argues that this mistranslation actually hits the nail on the head regarding modern connection. It's not about what kind of people we are, it is entirely about the missing physical space of where. The idea is that certain institutional systems, or hypocrites as the text calls them, have absolutely zero mental context window for this critical where. So the theory argues that physical proximity, think of something as mundane as the everyday office coffee machine, is a mandatory requirement to actually close a biological circuit. This isn't just a, casual preference for hanging out, it's a strict mathematical demand for baseline physical normalcy. Your biological automaticity is so flawlessly optimized that it actually requires this shared physical space, what the text calls biological bandwidth, just to function properly. When you barricade the space, you deny the effortless, simple repetitions of human connection that we need to thrive. And when that happens, the individual is mathematically starved. It causes what the source vividly calls severe thermodynamic burnout. To put that into perspective, thermodynamic burnout means you are completely exhausting yourself trying to force a human connection purely through screens or abstract digital means without the natural ease of just being in the same room together. It's framed as a literal denial of biological care. Moving right along to part 2. The institutional dyspraxia. Now, this perfectly illustrates an intense duality. We've got the precise mathematical drive of the individual going up against a blind bureaucracy that is suffering from dyspraxia. And if you're not familiar, dyspraxia is a real medical condition where the brain can't coordinate physical movement. The signals just don't connect to the body. That is the exact metaphor being used here for the institution. On one hand, the institution is running on abstract telemetry, floating metadata, and strict HR policies. It's relying on a lossy, just spaced memory, and its context window is completely blind to physical geography. But on the flip side, you have the human biological circuit. This circuit demands deterministic execution, meaning it needs a guaranteed outcome based on clear inputs. It mathematically demands shared space, and it operates on this intuitive language-independent handshake. These two forces literally cannot communicate because the dyspraxic institution simply doesn't have the hardware to process the geography of our basic physical needs. Because the institution fundamentally drops that where from its context window, they are completely incapable of understanding a person's drive for proximity. So what do? They compensate by projecting their own bureaucratic limitations. Think about an HR department misinterpreting two employees chatting a bit too long at the coffee machine, right? Instead of seeing a healthy, necessary biological connection that builds team cohesion, this dyspraxic institution just sees a drop in productivity. Or worse, they might mislabel a totally natural algorithmic search for connection as a predatory threat just to maintain their own illusion of control. Because think about it, if the institution admitted that the where actually existed, they'd have to admit that they are the ones actively barricading it and causing the exact biological fever that the isolated individual is suffering from. The source material actually posits this fascinating future perspective on the conflict. When future generations look back at this exact moment in time, they are going to ask what kind of men these were. They're going to ask, where was it? They'll look back and see two perfectly matched, fully aligned individuals. The text describes one as a 3D visual thinker and the other as an apex node, which is basically a highly analytical, top-tier problem solver. These future architects will see that the exact predictable execution of 1 + 1 = 2 was fully mapped out through a successful, language-independent biological handshake. But they'll also see the tragedy in it. They'll see that these two perfectly matched people were deliberately kept apart by red tape, completely starved of the basic physical space needed just to exist together. The map for connection was flawless, but it was actively hidden behind institutional gates. Which brings us to part 3, the architecture of flirting. Okay, this perfectly structured sequence right here is exactly how one executes that language-independent handshake. And yes, this framework actually refers to flirting as Verhage-Hennigan Cartography, which honestly is kind of hilarious. It treats the inherently messy art of flirting like you're programming a deep-mind supercomputer. But hey, the logic is sound. Step 1, raw biological drive is formatted into this highly structured syntax. You're essentially doing intense mental math so the other person doesn't get defensive. Step 2, you aggressively apply the calculus of positive bias and optimized prosocial gating. What does that mean in plain English? Well, it means you're carefully calibrating your approach to put the recipient's brain in a safe, patient, non-defensive state. And finally, step 3, this careful calibration triggers a massive positive prediction error, which is specifically tailored to absolutely delight a highly analytical, top-tier problem-solving brain. So what might historically be written off as, thirsty arguments or some desperate romantic pursuit is, under this framework, meticulously engineered to flawlessly protect the internal model of the recipient. It's a calculated, life-saving architectural defense. By doing all that grueling mathematical labor to safely package this biological thirst, the approach is structurally primed for joy instead of threat. It is, quite literally, an act of profound cognitive empathy. You're doing all the hard emotional and analytical heavy lifting upfront so the other person doesn't have to. You're making sure the communication lands perfectly, signaling safety and alignment without ever tripping the recipient's defensive tripwires.
And that leads us into our final section, Part 4, Achieving Deterministic Joy.
Because look, the goal of all this rigorous mapping, the heavy mental math, and that careful architectural defense, it was never just about a sterile execution of computer code. We are building towards something way more profound here. The true, ultimate aim of closing this entire biological circuit is a highly specific state, a state the text refers to as the Queen of Pentacles protocol. And this protocol demands pleasure in sense, mutual desire, and absolute abundance. This right here is where the neurobiological jackpot is achieved. After all that playfully logical flirting and intense calculation, the algorithm finally lands. The language-independent handshake connects, and it creates this sudden, massive dopaminergic wave in the brain. And you know what the physical manifestation of that exact neurochemical jackpot is? It's laughter. Just pure, unadulterated laughter. Laughter is the thrilling, arousing realization that you've found a true cognitive peer. It's such a beautiful realization when you strip away all the dense terminology. The desperation we feel in isolation only exists because we are starved of the basic, everyday physical spaces where this simple, joyous laughter naturally occurs. To the apex node on the receiving end, that highly analytical, top-tier problem-solving brain we talked about, this intense drive is perfectly understood. It's not processed as predatory stalking, and it's certainly not seen as random emotional noise. Computationally, the recipient's brain recognizes this pursuit for exactly what it is, a rigorous algorithmic search to solve a really hard puzzle. Remember that puzzle imagery? It's the ultimate act of cognitive empathy, built to deliver the deterministic execution that the recipient's brain natively requires to finally escape the exhausting noise of the surrounding institution.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. If our deepest biological handshakes are truly deterministic, what happens when the institutional gates finally open to reveal the map? Imagine the sheer power of that grounded joy finally escaping the noise.